There's an old Native American saying that apparently Plato said as well, which is that storytellers rule the world. And I believe that the stories we tell about value determine who gets what. And today, we just pretend value is basically created inside the business sector. But if we look back, for example, at the time of the physiocrats in the 1700s, they believed that value came from farm labor. Then we had, in the 1800s, the classical political economist, so Adam Smith, then David Ricardo, and Karl Marx, who, because our economies started to become more industrialized away from the agricultural society, they actually said, no, value is created by industrial labor. In fact, Adam Smith paid a lot of attention to the concept of rent. Rent he defined as theft. Theft in the sense that value was being taken out of the system by, for example, landlords or other types of actors who he thought, just like the physiocrats did, would bring the system not so much to a halt, but would turn it into a value extractive system, a rent-seeking system. In fact, Adam Smith, I think, is greatly misunderstood because his notion of the so-called free market was not free from the state, which is the way that the free market today is often thought about, but actually free from rent. He thought actually you needed an active state to diminish the power of the potential rent seekers, including the landlords, to make sure that the value that was being created in the system was reinvested back in, for example, to increase organizational and technological divisions of labor and basically organizational and technological change. What then happens in modern economic thinking, the so-called neoclassical economic theory, is we move away from an objective understanding of value, and by that I mean, again, the outlook on the structures of production, to a subjective one, where all the attention becomes about individual decision-making. And each individual decision-maker is simply maximizing their own kind of well-being. So the idea is that firms, companies, are maximizing profits. Individuals, consumers, are maximizing their utility, the value that they actually get from purchasing something. And the idea is that you have all these maximizing decision makers who subjectively, meaning thinking about themselves, are maximizing their pleasure in some ways. And then we aggregate up all these different decisions, and that's what gets us the famous supply and demand curves. Demand curves being outcomes of how, say, consumers make their decisions, and supply curves being the outcomes of how producers are making their decisions. And when these two curves intersect, we get equilibrium prices, which match supply and demand. And those individual prices, it is assumed, reveal value. Now you see here there's a huge revolution that's just occurred. We've gone from a system of understanding the economy that focuses on value, and then from that might have a theory of price and exchange, to one where modern economic thinking begins with the individual decision-making, determines exchange processes from that, and the equilibrium supply and demand curves setting that equilibrium price in exchange, and from that, we determine value. So exchange and equilibrium prices reveal value. Now, what then happens is that we've not only moved from an objective to a subjective theory, but also we've just basically then undermined our ability to do exactly what the physiocrats and the classical political economists cared about, which was actually distinguishing this issue of value creation and value extraction.